In a world gone mad, only rationality and common sense can save it. It's Andrew and Jerry Save the World with your hosts, Andrew Langer and Jerry Rogers. And now, here's Andrew and Jerry.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Andrew and Jerry Save the World. This is episode 56. Andrew and Jerry Save the Rule of Law. I'm Andrew Langer.
Jerry Rogers.
And Jerry, we've never done, I'm actually shocked because we talk about the rule of law. We've never done an Andrew and Jerry Save the Rule of Law podcast.
Really?
And we're doing this right now, by the way, because as we're talking about it, we are awaiting to see if today is the day that the New York City District Attorney, Alvin Bragg is his name, Jerry?
Alvin Bragg.
The
man who refuses to prosecute rapists and muggers and other kinds of violent criminals is going after the former president, regardless of your thoughts or
right.
feelings on the former president. What he did is not illegal.
No. What he did may be illegal, but hold on. We'll talk about this in a second. I want to get to. I don't want to get us to get ahead of this. You talk about Alvin Bragg going to be indicting Donald Trump allegedly for his alleged hush payments to Stormy Daniels. But Jerry, you raise the issue of the crime situation in New York and the fact that the New York District Attorney's Office is not prosecuting crimes and the crime rate has gone up. This is something that is happening elsewhere. Obviously, we have the same issue in Washington, D.C.
I was just in New York, Andrew Langer.
And that was where I was going to go, Jerry. I didn't know if you wanted to talk about it, but you had your own experience with this a couple of days ago, didn't you?
Well, let me be clear about this. I love New York City.
As do I.
I love urban America. I think that cities are important. I'm a Hamiltonian in that regard. I think cities are where venture capitalists and startup firms and small businesses, mom and pop shops, great bakeries and restaurants and sporting events. Cities are where new immigrants are assimilated into American culture. Right. This is important. Cities are important for a lot of our friends in suburbia or in rural America. You can't give up on cities, and unfortunately, over the past 3 to 5 years, cities have become ungovernable again, right? We're back to the bad old days of the late 70s, early 80s. And I was in New York today. Remember, I lived through the bad old days in the 80s in New York City. I was at Fordham University from 87 to we graduated in 91. And so I remember the bad old days. I lived in the Bronx. I was on Davidson Avenue, 1977, as a small child during the blackouts and the riots up and down Fordham Road. We could hear the rioting and the gunshots. I witnessed a murder when I was a kid.
Wow!
The Medina brothers had a bodega on the corner of on Davidson Avenue, and I was in the shop in the bodega when there was a robbery that turned into one of the Medina brothers getting shot and murdered. My point in saying this is I remember this. I remember these bad old days, and the feeling I would get in the pit of my stomach, in my mind, of having to remain diligent, even as an 8-year-old. Andrew, I carried a knife in my pocket.
I remember this.
When I traveled on the subway as an 8-year-old, I carried a knife in case I had to defend my mother.
Right.
Well, on St. Patrick's Day, we went up to Manhattan. Now, I'm going to just forgive the long story made longer.
No.
We went to Manhattan, and it was a mess. It was squeegee guys, open drug dealing.
Wow.
There were vagrants and aggressive homelessness. There were all kinds of just uncivil behavior.
Right.
To the point where at the end of the day at Bryant Park, my wife was accosted. My daughters were accosted. And what happened was I took my son to a restroom. Bryant Park has a nice public restroom. And I came back and there was a very aggressive panhandler. And my daughters politely said, no, thank you, no, thank you, no, thank you. And eventually my wife said, hey, they told you 3 times. And this man, I was on another side of tables outside, like picnic type tables. And this man went towards my wife.
Yeah.
And my daughter, Bridget, her boyfriend, Jack, stepped in. Hey, leave the ladies alone. They said no. And this guy kind of threw a chair and made a fake punch.
Sure.
And that's when I got up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm telling you right now, how I responded literally stopped the corner of 42nd Street.
Yeah.
Everyone stopped. And I had to escort this miscreant across the street. And I did it in a way that was old school Jerry. My point is that Manhattan, it is obvious to those who know Manhattan, but of course to visit. All my kids who love the city, love Manhattan, all said, we're not doing that again.
Right.
I mean, they'll go. I'm sorry, they'll do the parade again, but they won't do Manhattan again. Like next time, it's right to the parade. But let me just give you a juxtaposition, though.
Yeah.
We also went up to the Bronx the next day, and you might not know this, but the Bronx parade, the McLean Irish parade, there was a threat.
Oh, I did not know this.
Oh, yeah. There was someone who said they were going to murder the mayor of Yonkers.
Oh, my God. Wow.
And murder police officers all along McLean Avenue. Guess what the Irish did?
They came out in force.
They said,
yeah, bring it on.
Bring it on.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, we went up to the Bronx. It was family friendly. It was a wonderful experience. Sure. Small businesses, the restaurants, the Irish pubs, everyone was kind. It was a wonderful event. My point in saying this is that there's still hope for cities in the neighborhoods, but in these liberal progressive areas, it really is going south quickly.
Well, I mean, it comes down to, and it's an adage I haven't used on this podcast in a very long time, right? What I used to say is that the most well-intentioned policies eventually bump up against very real realities. And, we had because I, like you, Jerry, I remember I worked in the city in the 80s. I was mugged in the early 80s down in Midtown Manhattan as a kid.
Wow.
And I remember that. And then as I grew into adulthood or young manhood, me being 6'3" and the tall presence, I usually wasn't bothered. But I remember the city in the pre-Giuliani era, and just how horrible it was. And you have New Yorkers who complained about what Giuliani did. But the reality is, right, here's the funny thing. I don't know if you ever spend any time over on Broadway these days. You ever make it over to Broadway, north or south of Times Square?
Oh, sure. I have. Sure. Yes.
So they've shut off. They've shut off 7th Avenue, and they've shut off Broadway in certain areas.
Herald Square is shut down.
Right. They have all these tables outside.
Yes.
And for a very brief period, it was a very nice thing to be able to sit outside. But now, you're getting accosted by people. I mean, it's exactly what happened to you in Bryant Park. Yeah. And it completely turns the experience on its head. And yet you've got the mayor and the DA and et cetera, who don't seem, I mean, of course, this is part of the reason why Adams got elected, because he was at least more anti-crime than his predecessor.
Yeah.
But that ain't saying much. And this is a problem. I'll tell you this much. Let me just digress for a second, Jerry, because one of the things that I've decried in New York City is the rampant smell of weed. I mean, it's
everywhere. Oh my goodness, it was everywhere. Yes, right. Everywhere.
Was it up at the parade up in the Bronx?
Oh my! No, it wasn't in the Bronx.
Okay, that's what I'm saying.
Although there was a refreshing smell of beer in the Bronx.
There you go. Well, I mean, because I did smell it on Arthur Avenue the last time I was up on Arthur Avenue. I just want to have an editorial note, a moment of personal privilege here.
Sure.
In the same way that when you are in your car and you may be smoking tobacco, and that tobacco smoke will get sucked into the air intakes of other cars around you and you can smell them.
Right.
You've got a problem if you can't drive your car without everybody else knowing you're smoking weed. I'm just going to say this, right?
Yeah.
It's a situation where you and I were Jerry and I were on the phone yesterday. How surprising. You and I'm on 95 driving north, and all of a sudden I smell weed, and it's somebody in front of me is blowing clouds out of their window, and it's like, enough. We're on the southeast southwest freeway in DC, and it's like, something, I don't need that. In the same way that I don't want to smell somebody smoking cigarettes, I certainly don't want to. Anyway, you're
100% correct, and it's funny,
me. And that's the collapse of civil society, by the way. Go ahead.
No, and that's it, right? I remember years ago, even before I started doing the radio gig at WBAL, there was a sense about Baltimore City that if you wanted to go and just have a Wild West night where the rules and the law doesn't apply, we'll go to Baltimore.
Right.
And there is this growing sense in cities that, again, it's lawlessness. And again, criminals take advantage of that. But also the elites take advantage of that 100%. Because they'll go down to the clubs or to the gentlemen's establishments. They will drink openly, do drugs openly, do things they wouldn't do in their own neighborhood. And so this isn't just
it's literally the definition of slumming. Go ahead.
Yes, but this isn't you and I just coming down on poor people who live in urban areas. No, this is a problem for all Americans.
Yes.
And again, if the cities go, so goes America. And I believe that.
I commend everybody. You and I have talked about this again. I don't think on this show, but you and I have talked about the documentary NY-77, The Coldest Year in Hell.
Yes.
Which is available on YouTube. Go and watch it. And they talk about the mayoral election of 1977.
Yes.
1977 being a pivotal year in New York history for a whole host of reasons.
I have a book by, oh my goodness, Jonathan Mailer, called The Bronx is Burning.
Yes, of course. Great series that came
out
after that.
Right. Yes. And that book, the book though, is about the 1977. I mean, there's other instances in the book, Son of Sam, the Yankees World Series, but essentially the book is about that Mayor Beam.
Yes, Abe Beam.
Right. Losing the primary to Ed Koch, and 1977 was a pivotal year for New York City and cities.
It was interesting, right? Because I suspect that if Americans, New York City residents had their fill, it was a 4-way primary between Abe Beam, Ed Koch, Mario Cuomo, and Bella Abzug. And,
yes.
And I suspect that if Bella Abzug had won, she wouldn't have been much better than Abe Beam. I suspect if Mario Cuomo had won, he wouldn't have been much better than Abe Beam.
Well, Ed Koch was a good mayor.
Ed Koch was a great mayor, and Ed Koch set that city, moving forward. Anyway, not to sort of completely digress on this, because Jerry raised the issue of Alvin Bragg and it sets the stage for this. So Alvin Bragg is not focusing on prosecuting these crimes. Instead, he is focusing on, and there are two potential indictments that are happening. One of them having to do with Georgia and elections in Georgia, but the one that's getting all the headlines right now is this situation in New York City, because last week when we're recording, everybody can see this because we're recording this on Wednesday, the 22nd, the day after my birthday.
Yes, happy birthday!
Thank you.
I was waiting till later in the show to.
Oh, okay, I appreciate it. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. So reports came out last week that Trump was going to get arrested on Tuesday, and he was going to get fingerprinted and handcuffed. Let's go here. So,
but can I just give some context,
please? And because I want to now get back to the discussion we were about to have about the finer points of the law.
All right, number one. What Alvin Bragg, the DA, is doing, again, the person who won't prosecute criminals.
Yes.
He's actually breaking the law. Remember this, in New York City, these type of felony cases, there's a 5-year statute of limitations.
Exactly. Yes.
However, what we're looking at with Trump is a misdemeanor.
Yes.
And that has a 2-year.
Yes.
A 2-year. So he is bringing this prosecution after the law says he can't do it. Number one. Number two, there's a due process issue here. In other words, that if charges were going to be brought against Donald Trump, there is this expectation that he would have been charged and the case would have been brought, right? Swift justice. That hasn't happened. So there's a constitutional problem here. And also, mind you, that NeverTrumpers, Rich Lowry, Jonathan Adler, Andrew McCarthy, have all said that regardless of the statute of limitations, Donald Trump didn't break the law.
Jonathan Adler hasn't said that Donald Trump didn't.
All right.
Break the law.
Well, Rich Lowry has, and again, this is bookkeeping, and they're using terms like hush money, illegal payments.
Yes.
But the fact of the matter is, according to many legal analysts, again, not friends of the Trump person and the Trump administration and Donald Trump himself, have said that no, how these were structured was perfectly legal. There's a reason why, Andrew,
right,
that the previous district attorney of Manhattan did not pursue this case.
Let's pull it back even further, Jerry. There's a reason why, right? There's a reason why the federal government didn't pursue this. The U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York didn't pursue this under federal law. Then there's a reason why the Federal Elections Commission didn't pursue this under the law. And now we have the previous DA in Manhattan not pursuing this, and now we have this DA again. Remember the situation down in Georgia when
the previous DA refused to move forward with this case. The progressives went crazy,
right?
And Alvin Bragg is doing this not to uphold the rule of law, not to defend the Constitution, not to make the point that everyone, including the president, is not above the law.
Yeah, nobody's above the law.
He's doing this for naked political reasons.
Right.
You and I have made clear that we are skeptical of Donald Trump running in 2024.
Right.
I mean, I've come out and said he shouldn't run, that there's no reason for him to run, that he's disqualified himself to run. That being said, this case is wrong, and liberals and conservatives, good actors, people of good faith, should condemn this.
So this gets into, originally when Jerry and I were talking about this show, I was originally gonna call it something to the effect of Andrew and Jerry defend against the Banana Republic, Andrew and Jerry prevent the Banana Republic, something having to do with Banana Republic tendencies, which is this is what happens. So we talk about the rule of law, because if you don't have the rule of law, you have the rule of men, and law becomes arbitrary, as Jerry just said, talking about these issues of due process, and things descend into despotism. Which ironically is what the left constantly warned us against and the NeverTrumpers warned us against when Donald Trump was running, right? This idea that Donald Trump was going to use political power, use his office to bend the law enforcement community to his will and go after his opponents. Now, Donald Trump may very well have threatened these things, but he never actually did them.
Right.
But the left is doing them. In fact, the left always did them. And this is what we've talked about, is that, you know what the left is doing by what they accuse you of. So with this situation here, and again, it comes down to, you have to ask the reason why. Why this DA, why this prosecution, and why now? And by the way, when Jerry talks about the issues of whether or not what Donald Trump did was a crime, part of what he's referring to is the writings that legal scholars have done on this, and Jonathan Turley among them, in which they essentially call this a Frankenstein indictment. Now, we haven't seen the indictment yet. And we may see the indictment today. We may see it later on this week. Who knows? But it's the idea of taking disparate parts of the law and things that are dead and buried and raising them up and putting them together like you're building Frankenstein's monster and using that to go after. And there's something fundamentally wrong with that. There's a reason why we have statutes of limitations on things. And actually, Jerry, let me take another moment of personal privilege here and sort of talk about this in the greater context of things. We have seen over the last 50 years the erosion of the concept of the statute of limitations, the slow erosion of it.
Right.
Because there becomes a question of if justice hasn't been served in a particular crime, does the crime continue to run? And there's elements of federal law, especially in federal environmental law, where the concept of the statute of when the crime occurred, the date the crime occurred, that chips away, and they're essentially trying to resurrect that situation in a way that's never been applied or has very rarely been applied, and I don't think it's been applied successfully. And in terms of this case, I'm sorry, Jerry, go ahead.
No, and what's more, we see this that if the left doesn't get the outcome it wants in state court or in through the states, it goes to the federal level.
Listen, this is what happened with that with the pro-life protester whose name's now escaping.
Right, exactly right. Well, he went through the state system.
Right.
He was not charged. He was not charged for criminal offense, and it also went. It was vigorously pursued in the state the state system, and then the DOJ didn't like it. The Biden administration didn't like the outcome, and then they took this pro-life family man to federal court, and of course it was thrown out.
Let me tell another quick story about this to sort of illustrate the point of the twisting of the law, real quick, Jerry. So there was a situation in Florida, right? I don't know about you, Jerry, but when I'm driving along a road and I see a cop hanging out running speed traps, I will flash my lights at oncoming traffic to let them know that there's a speed trap ahead. Do you do this?
All the time.
All right, there you go. So in Florida, cops were getting very frustrated that motorists were warning other motorists about speed traps. So they set up a situation in which they set up a speed trap and they were watching motorists come at them. And when they saw a motorist flashing his lights at oncoming traffic, they stopped them and cited them. And they cited them under a Florida motor vehicles law that says you can't have flashing lights on the top of your car.
Right.
Right. And somebody had to actually explain the difference in court. The court ultimately decided on behalf of the people, thankfully, having to explain that there's a difference between the adjective of flashing lights and the verb of flashing lights.
Right.
But this is
Andrew. Let me add to that. Let me add to that. Think of in the recent past, New Jersey Governor Christie, and Bridgegate.
Absolutely.
Bridgegate.
This illustrates the point so well.
Right.
Thank you, Jerry.
The Obama administration saw Chris Christie, believe it or not. This is before Trump came to the forefront. Chris Christie was a potential leading challenge to Barack Obama. He had won praise in New Jersey, governed well, had bipartisan support, won with massive amounts of support. Anyway, during his reelect, there was this controversy where they closed down the George Washington Bridge in order to stick the thumb in the eye of the mayor of Fort Lee, a Democrat who refused to endorse Chris Christie. However, the feds used this as a way to go after Christie. Of course, politicians and the elites never.
Well, rarely, Jerry, because I'm going to tell a story about another challenger who got
rarely get in trouble for these sort of things. It's always the underling. And what happened was, several underlings were charged, tried, convicted. But New Jersey, it turns out, the federal law used didn't apply, and the Supreme Court threw it out.
Right.
But these people, and one of whom I knew well, she was a colleague of mine when I worked in the state legislature. She a single mom of 4. Had to go through years and years and years of court battles because the Barack Obama administration decided to use the DOJ. It weaponized and politicized the DOJ to go after political opponents. And again, we're seeing this more and more. And again, here's the thing. The bottom line here is that the right is accused of doing this.
Yes.
And I can't think of a single case where the right has done it. But we can
not
sit
since
here,
Nixon, certainly.
Right. We can sit here and talk about again, the Obama administration and the Biden administration weaponizing the DOJ, the IRS, and the FBI and myriad other agencies for political purposes.
Let me add another example of this, Jerry, because it's one of those things where we talk about the 2012 election and Barack Obama being paranoid about challengers, right? Remember, there was another governor, Republican governor, who was considered a credible challenger to Barack Obama, Bob McDonnell in Virginia.
Yes.
And Bob McDonnell, who got caught up again this was a corruption scandal, a quid pro quo scandal.
Except,
well, no, but time out for a second, right? McDonald's family accepted gifts from this person. But what ultimately happened, but McDonnell got convicted, but ultimately what happened is the Supreme Court says, when you have a quid pro quo, you have to have both the quid and the quo.
Right.
You have to have, just because someone gives somebody something doesn't mean that there's necessarily corruption. They have to do something about that. And so McDonald's conviction was overturned by the Supreme Court. But the point is that you had this weaponized DOJ going after these potential political opponents of Barack Obama. And this is, and then listen, we can go through the whole litany of abuses of power by the Obama administration, from the IRS scandals from the IRS to Operation Choke Point, to the weaponizing of U.S. attorneys against conservative climate skeptic groups, to the use of National Cancer Institute funds to produce reports.
We're seeing it today. We saw it this past week, where the Biden administration is using again the power of the White House, the imperial presidency, to impact ESG, right? This kind of woke investing, and again, the Congress, in a bipartisan manner, passed legislation to overturn this executive order that would have that put pressure on private equity firms and private banks not to be forced to invest in woke investments.
Let me talk about this.
But here's the thing. We just had this scandal with the Silicon Valley Bank. Now, I understand that it's complicated, that the Federal Reserve, interest rates, the bonds being sold off, they're all inflation. There are all kinds of factors that go into a bank's failure. But one thing that has been neglected, except from venues on the right, is this idea that Silicon Valley Bank got caught up in diversity, equity, inclusion nonsense, where they were putting tens of millions of dollars into bad investments based upon woke politics.
Let's be really clear about something with regards to the financial services industry, whether or not it's banking or investing or whatever. Finance. A bedrock principle in terms of these kinds of regulations, the rules that govern these industries, is that the folks running them have a fiduciary responsibility. That's a legal responsibility to maximize the results for their investors, to actually produce results for their investors, right? The idea is you don't want if you are being encouraged to invest in a product on the hopes that you're going to get some financial return down the road, the person offering you that product cannot lie to you and say it's going to produce value for you down the road when it's not going to produce value.
However, when the Department of Justice and the Department of State,
Jerry, hold on. Let me go down this road. The point is, this has been the way the financial services industry has been regulated for many, many years, basically since
up until 2 minutes ago.
Literally up until 2021, when the Biden administration came in. That was the bedrock principle. You must produce, you must offer products that are actually going to do what you promise that they're going to do and give a return on investment, or you have a reasonable expectation. Now ESG comes in, and Jerry, go ahead.
Well, and then these companies now feel compelled because they might have their licenses disrupted, or their businesses disrupted in some way by the federal government. And again, the irony here is that Joe Biden is putting in place practices that only 5 years ago progressives would only talk about in academia.
Right.
Again, think about this. In Joe Biden's budget, Andrew, there's a 25% tax on unrealized capital gains.
Yes. Yeah,
that is a tax on wealth people haven't earned yet.
Right.
This is insanity.
Yes.
This is something that Karl Marx would love, but even Karl Marx wouldn't speak it out loud. And Joe Biden is actually putting it in a budget.
In the same way that you are rewatching Veep, and Jerry and I have been talking about this, I have been slowly but surely rewatching the TV show Billions.
Yes.
And right now we're in a whole thing where one of the main characters, who is a gender fluid, non-binary person, but is also a financial genius, claims to have cracked the code on ESG and wants to do ESG investing. And it's very clear that there are serious risks that are involved here, and Bobby Axelrod is not taking them. But again, this is the stuff that was being talked about in fiction.
But here's the thing: many people would say, "Well, what do I care about unrealized capital gains? This is for the very rich." No. Yes. What if you're a family farm and you have property, and that property is assessed at X amount?
That's exactly it, Jerry.
You can be taxed on that X amount, even though you don't have the cash to pay the tax.
You'll be taxed twice, right? Because So let's be really clear here. I want to, because we want to make sure we're all on the same page.
But this is before you would even sell the land.
Right. Yeah, that's the point. So when you have a tax assessment and that tax assessment goes up, and this is a huge issue around the country right now. And I think there's even there was a politician I was just reading about who got a sweetheart deal in terms of his assessment. Anyway, set that aside. Loudoun County, guy in Loudoun County. We know that municipalities will inflate assessed values on properties because they want to bring in more revenue in terms of property taxes. That's one thing. Now, what the federal government wants to do, and what the progressives want to do, is they want to tie those assessments into, right? So if you bought land that was valued, or you bought a house and the assessed value was $100,000, and 10 years later, your county comes in and they assess the value at $300,000. Well, yeah, you're going to get taxed on that for your property taxes, unless you can fight the assessment. But the federal government is going to want to come in and tax you on the $200,000 difference between what you bought the property for.
What if you don't have the money to pay the tax?
Exactly. Yes. Then you have.
And again, remember this. The progressives. This is all connected. The progressives don't want you to own property.
Right.
So this could be a mechanism for farms and for rural Americans to be forced to sell property to pay these unrealized capital gains taxes. To do what? To force people into more urban and suburban areas, which is what they want, to get rid of roads, the automobile, to again increase transportation.
But also it's about giving sweetheart deals to their political allies to buy properties,
which we see
real cheap.
Right in Baltimore City and cities across the country. We have a housing crisis, yet these woke politicians, the Brandon Scotts, the mayor of Baltimore City, but other politicians and urban leaders, and so-called community leaders are making deals with big realtors to buy out and sell out local business owners and families. Let me say this,
please.
Energy is more expensive. Food is more expensive. Transportation, your car,
right?
Life, everything, everything is more expensive. They are how long are we supposed to, do it for the greater good? Yes. I told this to my kids yesterday. We were talking about how in the state of Maryland, they want to go to net zero emissions by the year 2035. New York State, and there was a report in Politico on this. So left-leaning Politico wrote about how in New York State you have by the year 2030, Andrew, a mandated zero emissions electric grid. And what's happening is the rate increases are happening now, and And the big rate increases will happen in years to come. So what's going to happen in blue progressive states, California, New York, Maryland, is what's happening in Germany and in Europe today.
Right.
You will have to make a decision. Should I put the air conditioner on? There's a reason why in Europe on a hot day, everyone is in the shopping mall, right? Because they literally can't afford to cool their homes. There's a reason why in Europe, every single year between 300,000 and 600,000 people die. They freeze to death in their own homes because they can't afford to heat their homes. The progressives tell us that this is necessary to get us to the transition to renewables.
Listen,
the problem is that the very rich don't have to pay the penalty and the very poor don't. It's going to be middle class working Americans who won't be able to live in their own homes. The poor will pay a price because they will be living in areas where they won't be. But here's the thing. No, wait. I want to comment on that because because look. We're talking now about how we have record low unemployment, yet we have record high welfare. What's happening is you have the progressives coming in, and they are providing housing, healthcare, food, cash payments, education, wraparound services to the very, very poor. And the very, very rich, because they're so, by virtue of their wealth, the elites, the progressive elites, don't have to live under the same constraints and the cost doesn't impact them.
But
this is working class Americans.
Yes, absolutely. The cost will impact working class Americans. Let me offer up something here. Again, another editorial comment. If your power company, and I know we have folks all around the country who watch and listen to the show, if your power company or electricity provider comes to you and says, sure, our listeners wouldn't have this happen. And they come to you and say, hey, we want to offer you a smart thermostat for your home. We'll come in and we will install it. We'll offer you a modest rebate for the first few months. But the caveat is, and they don't really share this, they usually bury the lead on this. You put a smart thermostat in your home, it means that the power company can control the temperature in your home. So if you are, and this is the thing, Jerry, if you move into subsidized housing, you move into government-owned housing, these smart thermostats are going to be in there for sure, to say the least. So the poor get impacted in that way because they no longer have.
Well, again, I don't know, Andrew. I think we're getting to a point in this country where, again, the elites are protected, they're insulated from their own policies, but the poor, they're taken care of, Andrew, in a way that puts. Look, I'm paying.
Poor are taken care of in certain ways, Jerry. I'm just,
no, you're right. The poor won't have. Yes. Everyone, the poor will be taken care of, but everyone will be equally miserable.
Well, yes. I mean, again, there are degrees of being taken care of. The point is, the poor are forced into. They're the ones who feel the control first and the ultimate control first, because they're the ones who are in the government housing.
Look, I'm not sure, Andrew. I mean, look, I mean, look, if you're on Medicaid is a terrible health insurance system. But the fact of the matter is, if you're on Medicaid, you don't have to worry about dental, vision. You can take your kid to the doctor. Now, mind you, there's access issues and there are formularies, but that is better than someone who's 100%. Paying $3,000 a month premium, and they have a $12,000 deductible.
Exactly. Yes.
And because of Obamacare, they can't get their kid into a doctor when their kid is sick.
Right. This is 100%. I agree with you absolutely. Right. Yes, there are degrees here, and I don't want to get us again too far afield of this, because I think.
But my urgency is because working people are so busy working. Again, this goes back to the Fred Smith adage, right? People are stupid about politics because they're smart. In other words, they are focused on things they can control. However, I think that adage needs to be updated, because right now, working class people are going to again, lose their ability to heat their homes, cool their homes, to travel with freedom, to work where they want. Look, We're seeing
and being forced to subsidize the education of both the elites and the poor. Right. Yes, this is exactly it. And this is why we've seen this transformation in America away from the sort of the traditional left-right dichotomies in terms of politics and who votes where. Why we're seeing a whole new sort of
and to your point of why the show is named, Jerry and Andrew and Jerry Save the Rule of Law, is that the progressives are doing this outside of the law.
Right.
And and again, we all know what happened at Stanford Law School 3 weeks ago when law students, again, using intimidation, shut down a forum, and then even afterwards have used intimidation to threaten administrators there and teachers there, and even the dean of the law school. And remember, these law students who don't believe in free speech, don't believe in the exchange of ideas, they believe might is right. These are going to be the lawyers and the judges in 10, 15 years. So we can't even rely upon the courts to protect our constitutional rights.
And because here's the interesting thing, and this is sort of the thread that's running through all of this. There's a fundamental question in the American Republic today. It's probably one elsewhere, but it's one that we're discussing, which is, and Jerry and I have been longtime free market limited government guys, free marketeers. We worked for one of the best free market think tanks in the world, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, and we believe to a certain degree in privatization. We've talked in the past, and actually it's Fred Smith who was, again, one of the first people to sort of talk about you can't run the government like a corporation. Just because the Nazis ran the trains to the concentration camps on time doesn't mean that that was a good thing, which is important. But we have done so much in terms of outsourcing functions of society to outside corporate entities, right? Again, you talk about the shifting alignments of the left-right dichotomy, something that a lot of free market limited government types would have applauded. The problem then ensues when government can use its power to manipulate these corporate entities outside and sidestep the Constitution. So whether it is putting pressure on social media platforms to silence speech, well, the social media platforms are private platforms. And just because the federal government put pressure on them doesn't mean that the federal government was violating people's First Amendment rights.
Look, Andrew, Real Clear Politics, which, again, for those unfamiliar, Real Clear Politics is one of the last places in media where both the left and the right meet. In terms of Washington traffic, it's number 1 among Republicans, number 5 among Democrats. So again, it's a place where both the left and right meet. That is not the case in other media venues. And the feds have been funding nonprofit groups to put pressure on those who sell advertising.
Right.
And they have a list of media outlets that are on the do not advertise list because, according to the feds, they are contrary to the regime.
Right.
And Real Clear Politics, one of the, again, honest brokers, one of the few honest brokers left in politics, and of course I'm the editor at Real Clear, just for full disclosure, is on the list, is blacklisted.
So let's
think about that. But that's the federal government.
Right. So let's go through the litany, right?
It's a violation of the First Amendment.
First Amendment. So, right. But this is the question, right? Oh, we're not violating the First Amendment. It's, again, Operation Choke Point. We're going to shut off the flow of money so that the speech gets constricted. Oh, no, we're not going to go after, gun manufacturers and gun retailers directly. No, we're going to make it impossible for them to get bank accounts, insurance, and credit card payment processing, right? Yeah. We're not going to go after ammunition. We're going to go after those sellers and manufacturers. We're also going to make it so that you can't have lead in ammunition. So we're going to drive up the cost of ammunition. We're going to make it so you can only have steel. And so you go down this road of all of these rights that get impacted with the federal government trying to sidestep. And ultimately it undermines the rule of, let me just bring up this example. Organizations like the Competitive Enterprise Institute and Cato and Heritage and others, organizations like the Center for American Progress, they have a right to advocate on issues. They are tax-exempt organizations engaged in research and education. The federal government wanted to, at one point, declare climate skepticism, and not just, we're talking skepticism about whether or not climate change is man-made, but also skepticism about the big government approaches to dealing with climate change. They wanted to label those activities as fraudulent. And they sent attorneys general to go and investigate them. You know, state attorneys general were, and so that
even if it turns out that the government oversteps its legal authority, it still chills speech. It's still because we don't have the resources to fight the Fed. So therefore, we're not going to go. We're not going to go and investigate this, research this topic. Look, I'm convinced, Andrew, and I won't name names, but I am convinced that many of the climate change, global warming skeptics who now believe that they've suddenly believed since this.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
They suddenly believe that climate change or global warming is real. It's and it's man-made. But they think that the solutions are worse than the problem. We have to think of different solutions. I think that is all horseshit, part of my language. And what they did was they admitted to, or they became part of the climate change cult because they didn't want to lose their positions at university, didn't want to lose their positions in the legal field, etc. Let me tell you something.
Yeah.
There's a reason why we went from global cooling to global warming to climate change. Because there is no science. Again, Andrew, I'm going to say this, and I'm a novice. I'm not a scientist, but the fact of the matter is that there's all kinds of conflicting information. You have NASA saying that, putting out reports and research talking about how the climate change, the change in weather is because of the Earth's orbit and because of activity on the sun. You have experts like Stephen Malloy showing us data, right? Surface data that since the year 2014, the Earth is actually cooling.
Right.
And so therefore, again, this has become political. And Robert Redfield said this a week or two ago in front of a congressional committee in regard to COVID.
Yes.
He was blacklisted because he dared to say we need to investigate whether or not this COVID, this virus, came from a lab, the Wuhan lab in China. And he was blacklisted. He was labeled a racist. He was the director of the CDC. He was apolitical, a scientist, a doctor. And he was canceled and he was put out to rest. And he said this. He said, look, when you hear the word consensus and the word science together, you know that there's something wrong.
Right.
Because
Steve Meyer said the same thing to me a couple of weeks ago.
Science is not about consensus. Science is about research and debate and investigation and testing and all the rest of it. And this is the problem with climate change. Also with looking backward in terms of what happened with COVID, there's a political narrative. And again, the progressives, the uni party in Washington has to keep the narrative alive. Look, we've talked about this, the mask issue. A friend of ours, Henry Miller, put out a piece a week ago. I put it up at Real Clear Health, saying that masks worked and that the Cochrane study that said masks didn't work, or didn't work is the wrong phrase. Whether or not they
don't do the reason why we were all required to wear them. Yes.
Right. Were they effective?
Yes.
In stopping the virus. He did this whole defense of mask wearing, and he missed the entire point. This wasn't about whether or not a proper mask worn properly,
right,
could stop droplets and therefore could be effective in at least lessening the chances of COVID spread. The Cochrane study wasn't about that. It was about whether or not the way in which the government mandated mask wearing, whether or not it was effective. And it wasn't effective. There's a real good piece up today over at Real Clear Policy that talks about, that takes on the Henry Miller and says, wait a second, are we so political over masks? The piece is in City Journal, and it uses the phrase maskaholics.
Yes.
So those who are clinging, and this is right and left, those who are clinging to the mask narrative, even with reams of evidence, they are still clinging to the narrative. This is a big problem in our public debate.
I will say this again, because now we're coming up on the 3-year anniversary of when I said it. If the Trump campaign had taken my advice,
you're so right. Ding, ding, ding.
And Donald Trump had worn both either alternating blue masks with Trump 2020 across the front or red Make America Great Again masks, we would never have had this mask debate. Never have been.
Maskaholics wouldn't exist.
That's exactly right. So once again, thank you, Jenna Ellis, for messing that one up.
You're right. He should have come out every day with a mask.
Let me bring some. Absolutely, and they would never photograph
make America Healthy mask.
Right? Yes. Oh yeah, Make America Healthy. Yes. Let me go back to the bullying issue for a second, Jerry.
Yes.
Because and climate, because again, we talk about this issue. Redfield, drummed out, made largely a pariah. Two of my favorite people in the climatological scientific community were a scientist named Sally Balyunis, and her colleague Willie Soon. They were with the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, and I believe Sally was the head of the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics.
Not anymore.
Well, yes. My point is, and if there's anybody who understands the way solar radiation hits the gas around a planet and can potentially warm that, the transfer of energy from a solar body into a planetary body, it's going to be an astrophysicist. They were drummed out of the scientific community. Sally Balyunis, again, if not the head, a senior researcher with the Harvard Smithsonian for Astrophysics, I believe now raises golden retriever puppies out of the scientific business. Willie Soon had to go into hiding. He was being hounded by the left,
which proves the point.
Yes,
that we are moving past truth, moving post the law, past the law.
We talk about the rule of law and the collapse of this. So we've got this DA in New York, we've got this DA in Georgia. We've talked about other things. We talked about Chris Christie. We talked about Bob McDonnell. We haven't talked about the Supreme Court justices who were also, we talked about the pro-life activists, Supreme Court justices who were having protests illegally outside of their homes. No one in law enforcement touching that with a 10-meter
no arrests.
And no arrests. We had a guy going and wanting to kidnap a Supreme Court justice and harm his family. He was arrested, but again, no increase in security around the justices' homes. I mean, again, the pressures, again, going back to Barack Obama speaking at the State of the Union, looking down and castigating Supreme Court justices from the podium of the House of Representatives, unprecedented in terms of the pressure being put.
Right.
And thankfully, again, you've said this, right? Taking the long game. We know they're trying to remove conservatives from the profession, right? What happens if you remove conservatives from the profession of law? You don't have conservative district court judges, appellate court judges, or Supreme Court justices.
Yeah.
And that's what they want. And that's, by the way, why there is also this concerted attack, not just at Stanford, but elsewhere against the Federalist Society. They've been trying to deal with the Federalist Society for years. Anyway.
Look, there is an undoing of meritocracy. We've talked about how we are progressively advancing backwards towards tribalism and dynasty as opposed to the rule of law and allegiance to ideals. Look, everywhere we turn, the left has embedded itself. We're still arguing, or some are arguing, that we have to make the case that America isn't a racist nation founded on racist principles. I thought about this morning because I was talking to my kids at breakfast, and my daughter Grace brought up some items in her social studies class, and I said, look, sweetheart, the way we should be looking at American history is exactly opposite the way that those who are writing textbooks are presenting it, and that is America is the great I'm using that word again, undoing of human history, where slavery and bondage and women as property, it was the American system that undid this.
Right.
Now, it's a process, and it's taking decades and even centuries. But without the American experiment, who knows where we would be?
Right.
Look around the world. I love this. I saw this real quick. I saw this in an interview, and I can't tell you who the interviewer is or interviewee, but it was a CEO, and the person conducting the interview says, "Do you own any slaves?" And the CEO said, "Well, no, of course not." And then the interviewer said, "Well, are you wearing Nike? Do you have an iPhone? Do you drive an electrical vehicle?" And yes. Well, then of course you personally are connected to probably between 40 and 60 slaves in the world. Slavery and anti-women rights and real racism and ethnic purges are happening everywhere around the world. And yet progressives want to undo. They want to destroy, transform the very entity, i.e. America, that has put a stop to it. This is going to end badly.
And I want to get to that in a second, Jerry. I think you're absolutely, because I wanted to talk about predictions. By the way, I apologize for those of you who are watching. If you're listening, you go watch the video. If you see me grimacing as Jerry has been talking, it's because there are, how many hours are there in a week? 144 hours in a week, right, Jerry?
Yes.
And of course, the 1 hour and a half that Jerry and I decide to pick to do this show, the lawn people show up outside of my studio. Like, it's like uncanny how the timing. It's
I haven't noticed that I'm on the show with you.
Well, no, because I've muted my microphone. I'm just saying that's why I've been grimacing on the phone. Jerry, one of my greatest disappointments, not a great, it was a disappointment to me. I'm not going to say one of my greatest disappointments. I'm not going to be hyperbolic about this. Of the last 10, 15 years in political movie making has been the Dinesh D'Souza film, America, Imagine a World Without Her.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
All right, don't. I went in there hoping that it was going to be an extrapolation.
I have no use for Dinesh.
But okay, but setting all of that aside, I think somebody should make a movie, right? Yeah. I went in there with the expectation that it was going to be an extrapolation of what would the world look like had we not had an American Revolution in 1776 or between 1776 and 1781, right? Imagine a world without that American rebellion and that rebirth of Americanism. But that was not what this movie was about. Someone needs to do that movie. Right, an alternative history in which America doesn't exist, to see what the world would have looked like.
Or even Andrew, what if America ends in March of 2023? Look, to a large extent, we talked about this. How did the American Republic end? Gradually, then suddenly. The George Floyd event has given license to the left to implement things that they would never have implemented before. Look, I was thinking about this. My sister called me just before the show.
What did she call you?
Well, she called me. Hello, Jerry. She called me on the phone and said that a friend of ours had posted on one of the social media platforms in support of transgender, homosexual, LGBTQ+ issues, that God stands with the marginalized. And I thought about it. The transgendered movement is not marginalized. It's celebrated. The LGBT plus movement isn't marginalized. It's celebrated.
For Joe Biden to get in front of the White House, in front of a podium and say, I'm not signing this parental bill because it'll marginalize LGBTQIA kids.
It's insane.
It's idiocy. Yes. Go ahead.
But again, it was a joke movie, a bad movie, but but idiocracy.
Yes.
We are in a way, we have suspended disbelief and we are governed by idiocracy, but we allow it. Like all these parents, for instance, in New York City or Philadelphia or Baltimore City, who rally, right? They have these rallies, no violence rallies, gun-free rallies. They're the same people who keep on putting into power the people who are dismantling.
Right.
And again, because I live in Maryland. See, Westmore is brilliantly advocating and advertising his very new governorship.
Yes,
and it's all about leave no one behind. But if you look at his budget, if you look at what the Democrats in Annapolis in the State House are passing, it is leaving behind small businesses, working families, very poor kids who are trapped in bad schools.
Yeah.
It's and religious people who have religious faith. The governor of Maryland, not unlike the governor of California or the governor of New York, they are literally using state power, government power. They're using the law to go after people with whom they deem as dangerous, and dangerous means we oppose your agenda.
Exactly. And let me get into this, because one of the things that Jerry and I, in terms of talking about issues of hope, right, one of the bright spots on the horizon for the last 18 months, and I would say certainly going into the 2024 election, they probably, well, I mean, we understand the way chicanery happened in the 2022 cycle. But these parental groups and educational groups, the parents who are trying to take back their schools, this is a force that has been and is being mobilized to do real and meaningful work in terms of pushing back against this agenda. And it's got to start there. The folks who lead this kind of a movement are the folks who go on and do other things, who get into state houses and go to Congress. But hold on.
Yeah.
So what's the reaction from the left? What do the teachers unions do, Jerry?
What?
They go and they enlist the help of the Department of Justice to go and demonize and investigate the people who are actually taking the time. This is why the collapse of the rule of law is so important,
right?
And why we are fearful down the road.
And also, again, my 2 cents on that issue is stop trying to save the public schools. They can't be saved. Get your kids out of public schools immediately. But let me say this. I'm always talking about how the left beats us every battle. They're winning the war. It's true. But there are 2 movements. There are 2 conservative movements that have been very successful. And I don't understand why more people on the right don't emulate these 2 movements. The first is the pro-life movement.
Right.
The pro-life movement has been remarkably successful.
And this is why the FBI is showing up at activist homes.
To the point where the Supreme Court finally and correctly overturned Roe v. Wade.
Right.
But now they are engaged in the states, and we see pro-life laws and protections for unborn children and women in crisis pregnancies. We're seeing, at least in half the states, we see that there's the movement continues. Also, the homeschool / school choice movement. And again, there were lots of defeats, like you mentioned, the 2022 midterms. Like, you know, the red wave didn't materialize. But what happened in myriad states were school choice advanced.
Right. Yes.
And so, again, if our friends who are fighting the climate change alarmists, our friends who are pushing back on tax issues or regulatory issues, they need to look at the pro-life movement and the school choice movement, because they've been successful.
And with that in mind, right, that's where, and I don't think it's an obscure issue, but I think that if somebody is smart, one of the next ways to organize people is in terms of their relationship between themselves and their power companies, right? Because for the most part, power companies are monopolies in many of these states and municipalities. You have the one, and because of the cozy relationship between the state governments and these power entities, the public can get squeezed generally. And so in the same way that folks are getting organized around schools, right? Parents, people who don't have kids in schools, they're not going to get organized in these. They might get some organized, but for the most part, they don't have skin in the game. Everybody who pays a power bill has skin in the game in terms of rate paying. That could be one way of doing this. Investors.
But they're a captured audience, though.
In what way?
Well, if Pepco raises my rates because I have to pay here's the irony. Just let me take two steps back, or one step back, take two steps forward. The irony is that if Pepco raises my rates because I have to pay for the greening of the grid, the irony is that it's going to be through fees.
Right.
But now you have the Democrats in the Biden administration all in on
That's okay, Jerry.
fees.
We could take that back. Listen,
to your point, though, you're right. To your point, if what should be done is this. So when you go to the supermarket, there ought to be, and they did this in Philadelphia, by the way, when they instituted a beverage tax there.
Right.
How much the tax was and how much the soda cost was. And folks were outraged, and they threw the mayor out, by the way.
Right.
Mayor Nutter, I think it was.
I don't remember. Yes.
It was Nutter. Regardless, I think all corporations, like gas companies, ExxonMobil and other places should be right there. Here's what you're paying for gas, but here's the federal tax and here's the state tax.
100%. Yes.
I think that this would be an interesting, if companies won't let's have transparency in pricing. Look at your cell phone bill, your Verizon bill, or whomever your carrier is, and how many federal fees are there. So when this administration,
Jerry, it is the danger of having automatic online bill pay and having
right. But again,
yes.
it shows you how empty the left is in terms of wanting to help working people. If they wanted to help working people, we would have full transparency and we would know all these fees and all these taxes. I was remiss. I have to say one more thing, and John, and I apologize. Yeah. The third movement that is remarkably successful and should be a model is the abolitionist movement to the civil rights movement.
Oh yeah, of course.
And I want to say this. I think conservatives and people of faith are going to have to take a lesson from the Black Panthers. I think they're going to have to they're going to have the civil disobedience, protests, and they're going to, and we have to protect ourselves.
I listen. As someone who's read, Eldridge Cleaver's Soul on Ice, it was a book that moved me as a teenager. Listen. I've always been someone who's been sympathetic to the concept of buy the ballot or buy the bullet.
And I've always said this, and this, in terms of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. Now, I have great admiration for King. I think when we teach Washington, Jefferson, I think Lincoln and King need to be included into the founding fathers of this country. But I also think that Malcolm X was right. The initial Malcolm X. If you're put upon, if you're discriminated against, if the law's against you, if the government's against you, well, you have no choice but to push back.
Listen,
and we're not there yet, but I do think the church, people of faith, conservatives are going to have to push back.
Jerry and I disagree on the music of Public Enemy, because they said some things about Elvis that Jerry doesn't disagree with. But this is why I always liked Public Enemy. But this again was one of the great failures of the Obama administration, was the issue of the not framing abuses of power as being something universal. And of course, they didn't want to do that because they wanted to divide us. Jerry, we are running down on time here, and I know you wanted to talk about some other stuff. So,
well, it's your birthday. It was my birthday. So
happy
birthday!
Thank you.
You are a good friend, a great friend. I looked up the term mensch.
Yes.
And it means someone to admire, someone to emulate. I think that's a good description.
Thank you. Listen. I will be very frank in that I've always aspired to be. Frankly, I've always aspired to be mentioned.
You are. Well, you've got there.
Congratulations. Just to mention.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We had a lovely celebration last night. We went out for ramen with my wife and me with our daughter and my daughter's boyfriend, who's a great guy.
Awesome.
I had a lot of fun hanging out with them. Went out for ice cream afterwards. Wanted to go to my favorite ice cream parlor, Jerry.
Where is that?
Well, here in Williamsburg. There's an ice cream parlor that I like. And they just reopened for the season, but they're only opened Thursday through Sunday, which
tomorrow.
So
you deserve a birthday week anyway.
Went out. Well, all right. So we've got a family member. I won't say who, getting married in a couple of weeks. So we're sort of all well into that mode going on. We're going to have my parents and my in-laws over on Sunday, possibly my brother, possibly another friend. And one did something yesterday, Jerry.
Yes.
This is the kind of life I live. I ordered a case of jumbo artichokes online from an artichoke grower out in California.
Does that mean 12 jars?
No, not jars of artichoke hearts. We're talking about the big jumbo whole artichokes. You got.
So how many is in a case?
I got 12 artichokes. Yes.
How many are in a case? Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I got a case of 12.
12.
So big size artichokes. We're gonna steam them up. We're gonna have because I may do steak, or I may just do tri-tip, which is a California thing.
I'm intrigued with how the term case. If it's a case of beer, it's 24. A case of wine is 12.
Well, artichokes are done by size. So depending on the size of the artichoke is the number of artichokes you get in a case. This particular size of artichoke was 12 to a case. I think you could buy smaller. We don't know how many people are coming over on Sunday, but these are big sized artichokes. And I didn't realize, but the California artichoke crop was hit very hard this winter. So I was glad to be able to support them. But
yeah, I like to
but thank you, Jerry.
Well, happy birthday. I love you, buddy.
I love you too.
I like to give a little I don't know what's the word for it, but a little like
approbation,
a preview of where some conversations I like to have moving forward with you. 2024 is coming up.
Yes, it is.
And I believe it's going to be a winner take all. And what I mean by that is whoever wins the White House is going to win the Congress. The House is so the margin there is so slight. And the same thing in the Senate. I think who wins the White House, whoever runs for president, wins the presidency, will also take the House. And it's interesting to me, and I don't want to be controversial at the end of the show, but stay tuned for more conversations. I wonder sometimes, many of our friends who are Trump supporters believe Trump to be this almost savior. Like, remember the
I remember
the anonymous piece put out by the American Mind, by the Claremont Institute. Was it Flight 93 scenario?
Yeah.
Where if Trump didn't win in 2016, it would mean the end of the Republic. And it was a good argument. I'm starting to wonder now if Trump, the Trump phenomenon, if he himself is going to end the American Republic. And what I mean by that is this. He can't win.
Right.
I don't think he can win because there are too many Republicans, conservatives, people of faith who just won't vote for him.
Right.
Democrat. But however, I don't think any other Republican can win if he remains a major presence.
Right.
And so it might very well be that Trump, either being on the ticket or off the ticket, but angry about it, delivers the White House and therefore the Congress to Democrats. And that's it, Andrew.
Well, right.
That's the end of the Republic.
We didn't talk about this with regards to these indictments, right? The continued pursuing of Donald Trump has nothing to do with any kind of concept of justice.
No, they're feeding his ego, his narcissism, that's exactly so he will run.
And if
he doesn't get the nomination, he's going to be, it was stolen from me.
Right.
Greatest thing Donald Trump could do, and you know what? And I thought there was
he'll never do it.
And I thought there was a time when I thought it was in him.
Yes.
But how he behaved after the 2020
election and January 6th especially.
How he behaved. And again, you and I are on record of J6. It's not an insurrection, but regardless, Trump really did bad after the election. Bad. You did bad. I know.
You're channeling Donald Trump there. It's bad.
Right. Yeah. Bad. And I thought,
not good.
And I said this after the election, he should concede defeat, work for the transition, and come back in 2024.
Jerry, the writing was
and
on
win.
The wall
but he never did it.
Right, and that's why we lost the Senate.
Right.
To
this day, the reason why we don't have the Senate is because of Donald Trump. And that look, the polling data shows us this. The get out the vote efforts show us this. Trump twice delivered the Senate to the Democrats.
Right.
And however, imagine if he did a mea culpa and he said, look, America's too important. Please support if he doesn't get the nomination.
Right.
Or better yet, if he withdraws ahead of time and says, America's too important. There are too many petty grievances and lawsuits and people coming after me. I'll take the arrows. I'll take the bullets for America, but I'm going to bow out.
Right.
And I'm going to throw my support behind.
There's no merit to this. I don't even want him to say I'm going to throw my support behind, because I think that damages whoever it is.
It's true.
I think the bottom line is he says, this is all, pardon me, Geraldine, this is all bullshit. None of this makes sense. I'm going to beat all of this. But it's all garbage. And I know I'm going to beat it, but America is too important.
Yeah.
He doesn't have it in him. And first,
that's
nobody around him who was going to tell him, who has the gravitas to tell him, you know something, Il Duque, you don't have the it's not going to happen. They're going to hang you by your heels. Right. That's the line from, never mind. I was going to say,
but again, that's what the GOP, what the nation, what conservatives, that's what we need.
Right.
We need the I'm gonna throw myself on the grenade.
Yeah,
we need a Captain America.
But we need
that's what we should do.
We need an honest broker who is able to tell him that in a way that he'll listen. And unfortunately, he doesn't have those people around him. And
his own daughter told him this. His own daughter said, "You shouldn't run," or "I'm not going to support you. We're not going through this again." Yeah, essentially saying,
"I don't know." That makes me look at that.
But no. I mean, regardless of her personal conversation, the fact that she's taken herself out of any potential campaign in 2024, that's enough to tell the father, "Oh my goodness, I have lost my daughter."
Yes.
And again, it's interesting because the Democrats are so weak in terms of candidates. Buttigieg not ready. Vice President Harris is like, I've never seen someone like this. Right. All the mocking of Dan Quayle back in the 80s because of his intellect or lack of intellect.
Oh yeah.
This is Vice President Harris.
Right. 100%.
This is a woman who is, I don't know. She's the Forrest Gump of politics, my friend.
Well, I don't think she's quite at John Fetterman's level, but she's certainly approaching that. So, Jerry, you're on Sunday.
I am back behind the stick on Sunday. We're going to talk about all of these big issues, and also I'm going to recap my visit to New York, St. Patrick's Day. And that's on Sunday, WBAL. If you can't catch the show, the podcast is great.
Good. And this week's episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire, Lynn Ulbricht, mother of Ross Ulbricht, who was accused of being the creator of Silk Road, serving 2 life terms in prison for his creation of Silk Road. Talking with her next week. Zach Greenberg from the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education. We talk about free speech. We talk about what happened at Stanford. Jerry, what do you want people to do?
Find the truth, plant your feet, stand firm. God bless you.
Have a great week, everybody. Have fun, and please stay safe.
Feliz Cumpleaños.
Thank you, Jerry.